2021 Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a continuation of our deliberations on the Clear and Objective Housing Code amendments. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting's format that I need to take care of first. Did I miss something there? Thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those of you viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those of you listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it is your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes. So your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone again for their patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. With that, I will move on to item A, which is public comment. Do we have anyone wishing to provide public comment today? Not seeing any. Let's give another beat here to be sure we're okay there. I think we're good. So with that, I'm going to close the public testimony and move us on to item B, which is deliberations of the Clear and Objective Housing Code amendments. I believe Janessa Dragovich is going to lead this part of the meeting. Thank you, Janessa.
Thank you, Chair Ramey. I'm Janessa Dragovich. For those watching at home, I'm the project manager for the Clear and Objective update. Also with me today, I have a few other staff members. We have Planning Director Alyssa Hansen and Gabe Flock is a principal planner and project resource, and Lauren Summers from the City Attorney's Office are all here as well, and will potentially be jumping in to support me today as we go through deliberations and questions. So commissioners, you may recall I sent you an email this weekend that had another document with a bunch of links and stuff to help you kind of navigate through the materials. I'm going to use that document as my guide as we go through the remaining discussion items. And in that email, I'd asked in particular, just for efficiency's sake, if we could kind of start the meeting off by going through 5 of the items that I'm not anticipating need discussion, but I want to check in and make sure that everyone was okay with the staff responses to the testimony comments and clarification questions that had come up. So that was my thoughts for how today will flow would be to kind of address those topics, see if there's any questions. If not, then we'll move into the couple remaining items that we hadn't gone through in our first 3 deliberations. Then once we do the straw poll votes on those, and I believe those are minor fixes too. So hopefully we can get through those pretty fast. And then we can circle back to the follow-up items on a couple of the transportation issues. That's where Gabe being here today is going to be helpful in case you have more questions that came up after seeing the follow-up information that we provided. But we can address those follow-up items and then move on to a final kind of culminating straw poll to accept all of the other kind of typo changes or reference errors that had been in the draft packet, but that I didn't elevate to needing straw poll votes or check-ins. So, and I also want to do a little bit of a check-in at the end on the findings that I had provided before in November, and I'll comment a little bit more on that when we get there, but just to give you an idea of the meeting flow today. And then hopefully if we can get to a good point at that point with good, clear direction, or possibly having all of the changes wrapped up in all the straw polls that you've done, then for the February 9th meeting, I can come back with a clean version of the draft code amendments based on incorporating all of the draft or all of the direction that you've given us so far, and a clean version of the findings as well. And then on the 9th, you could make your formal recommendation to council. And then we do have March 8th is tentatively scheduled as the council public hearing, assuming we don't need more deliberation meetings in between then. So with that, I'll pause real quick. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the flow for today, or are we ready for me to jump in? I'm seeing a lot of head nods, so I'll jump in. So the first check-in is on those 5 items that I'd called out in email. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen just so that you can see the item numbers in front of you. Okay, so this would be the blue highlights over the line items with the blue column over here under straw poll. The yellow ones are the 3 that I highlighted that I definitely need straw poll votes with check-ins. So item 32 was a clarification on the word dedicated and the use in the code. 35 was a clarification on common open space under the PUD requirements. 36 was a question on how we were going to calculate a sum, also related to the open space. And another question on the clarification on a place in the code that allows a city manager determination. And there was a question on whether that was discretionary. And then the final one was a clarification about whether offsite improvements could be required based on one of the criteria that was included. And so staff responses provided explanation on all of those. I'm going to assume that you've had a chance to read the questions and the responses. So is there anything in those 5 items that any commissioner would like to elevate and discuss at this point?
See, Commissioner Edwards, your hand is up. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Janessa. This is awesome work. I have a question about number 7B3, the ownership of the dedicated. I'm trying to understand exactly what that means. So it's basically saying that the common space that's appropriated on a site is dedicated to the collective, owners of the neighborhood. Is that what I'm understanding that to mean? Am I correct in that?
Correct. So
Okay.
In order to ensure that all of the residents of the development have legal access to the common open space area, because this isn't a public open space area, it's a private held in common open space tract. That was the term. And the testimony question came up because one of the reviewers has a distinct connotation with the word with the term dedicated to only mean dedicating like public right of way. So dedicated to the public. And so it was kind of a check-in on whether it was appropriate to use the term dedicated when it was transferring an ownership or rights to private and public. Okay. And so we checked that.
So that makes sense. I guess I'm still trying to, my opinion and what I've seen, and I know I keep referencing this neighborhood next to me, but it's brand new and it's a 42 lot needed housing. I know it's done under the when it was needed housing. And they have, and this is why, kind of the reason for my question, they have a open space that appears to be stormwater mitigation. I can't actually tell other than to say that when you look at this giant open space, it looks like a pond could be there. And maybe during certain times of the year, a pond does fill up in that space. But right now, it's just a big open space. It's not a space that you would go walk your dog in or anything like that. It is fully accessible, but it's, like I said, it's kind of a giant dish, but it is what I think the value, if I lived in that neighborhood, the value of this open space is this nice buffer between the neighborhood and then the other neighborhood. And so it's kind of a view shed kind of concept. So instead of it being accessible by way of, I can walk my dog through there, it is truly open space. And so I had a question as to whether or not it has to be, when you say accessible, what does somebody have to be able to do in it? And then can it be used for other requirements such as stormwater mitigation? So could you kill two birds with one stone essentially and utilize, create open space that also serves that dual purpose? Does that make sense? So it's more of just a question just to kind of understand what we're saying here.
It does. And that was one of the other clarifications had been on what could be allowed, what was allowable within that open space. We have some different requirements throughout the code that do limit what you can do within some types of areas that are, that are required. For this one, for clear and objective, we are allowing stormwater facilities and whatnot. We're not trying to over define what accessible means. We wanted to make it clear that you would have access to get to the open space track. But we also wanted the flexibility because stormwater facilities can take up space and need to be placed somewhere. And so it's a common thing that we're going to see that joint use of an open space area. So we did specifically want to be able to allow stormwater facilities to be to serve a dual purpose.
Okay.
For the open space to kind of serve some dual purposes. That said, under clear and objective, we didn't make it super prescriptive on what you can or can't do within that area.
Okay. And then the lack of super, I don't want to say clarity, but like, to your point, would also be a reason why there is really no assignment of who's responsible for maintaining this area. That's the other question I had. If it's this publicly available open space, whatever that means, is it up to the developer to figure out who's going to maintain that space? And
I'm going to like to Gabe a little to chime in on this one. There's homeowners associations typically are set up in developments like this. And so my assumption is that would be there. It's not something we've prescribed in code to my knowledge in other instances, but Gabe, do you have any concerns if we're not prescribing that? Or
I think the requirement for access as well as maintenance is typically determined through our stormwater standards. So for example, if you handle public stormwater from streets or other public facilities, then there would be a related requirement or need for public access easements. I think what we're talking about here is really truly private. So when you mention publicly available open space, I read that to mean specific to the rights of residents within the subdivision, right? So it's not truly public or quote dedicated in the sense of the general public, but the intent is to allow for the private access and maintenance of the stormwater facility, assuming it's within a common open space area. So through that subdivision process, we would typically have easements that are established as part of the plat that really dictate those rights and responsibilities privately among owners, right? And rather than the general public.
Okay, that's super helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I see Commissioner Taylor's hand is up.
Also, Commissioner Edwards, and correct me if I'm wrong, Janessa, it also, that subsection 7B3, it actually doesn't use the word access. So it's really kind of, it really is what Gabe talked about. It's just that it's equally, all of the owners within the development site are equally participating and involved. Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions on any of those items? So Commissioner Edwards, that satisfied your clarification on that, and is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I did have one other question on, let's see, the item 34. Are we there yet, or should I wait?
We're not there on 34
Okay.
yet. We'll do 33 first.
Okay.
So sounds like there's no straw poll needs for any of those 5 items that I listed. So we'll move on to item 33, which is a requested change also related to the PUD open space requirement. This was one where we had drafted a requirement to have a minimum area that's 70 foot by 70 foot. Basically, the intention was to try to include some area that has dimensions that could be used for a playing field or some sort of larger outdoor kind of gathering or need. And so there was a request to change that and reduce it down to a 50 foot by 50 foot minimum dimension standard, and staff is supportive of that change. So we would just like a straw poll vote from the commission to see if the commission all supports the change to reduce it from 70 by 70 to 50 by 50.
Okay, so let's do a straw poll. Hands up on that where I can see them. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why am I missing? Did I not count myself? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7-0. Perfect.
Excellent.
Wow, everybody's awake and paying attention. Very good.
So the next one is item 34, Commissioner Edwards. So I'll cue it up and then you can ask your question. This was one where we responded to the testimony that came in and suggested adding a chunk of text to the beginning of that standard to accept where a lot or parcel in the development abuts one or more of the common open space areas. So this is again part of that, our attempt to try to ensure that there's access for the people within the development. But it was brought up that requiring access, if in a theoretical case where you could design a development where every single lot has direct access, then we shouldn't need to require a frontage requirement. So again, staff supports adding this exception language to it. Any questions?
So,
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. Oh, wait.
No,
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
Chair. My question just had to do with, so you mentioned access on this, because 20 feet, okay, 20 feet it seems like an arbitrary amount, I get that, but when you say of frontage, does that mean unobstructed, I have 20 feet of area that I have to be able to access, or could vegetation exist there? It just has to be, so I guess it was more of a question. I'm just trying to visualize what, it doesn't appear to be limiting things like vegetation, like you could, or you need a 20-foot wide area that someone could literally drive a car through, or, I mean, I guess I didn't understand why 20 feet. What would it need to accommodate? Why couldn't it be a path, or, a 10-foot path, or, I don't know. So that's my question. I was just trying to understand because we're not talking about giving people access necessarily, why do we need 20 feet of access? And what does that 20 feet have to look like? Can we have trees and bushes planted in that 20 feet? It's just, I don't know. Maybe that's a confusing question. I apologize. I didn't mean to stump you, Janessa. That was not my intention.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So the idea of this requirement was in the event that not every lot has direct access. So meaning if they don't have direct access, then they either need to be able to get to the common open space area traveling on public or private streets that they do have legal rights to walk on or drive on or bike on, however they're getting there. Or there needs to be an access point to the open space directly to either a public or private street so that people can go on there without trespassing on somebody else's private property, basically. So the 20 feet was a somewhat arbitrary number. Again, we have to pick a starting point and something that makes sense. 20 feet is what staff came up with as a reasonable amount of frontage to accommodate if there was a need to provide access that in that manner. But we're talking about just like that track would have at least 20 feet abutting directly on a proposed public or private street.
Yeah, okay.
It's not prescriptive in terms of plant there or what would be done there.
Okay.
So I was imagining you maybe had the 5-foot setback, which left 10 feet down the middle. So you weren't gonna have people walking next to other people's, I mean, just, that kind of made sense to me. Try to push activity to the center of this 20-foot strip, leaving buffer on either side. If someone's residence was on either side of that strip, you wouldn't be next to them. You'd be able to go down the middle.
I don't think that, because we're not saying what that access needs to be improved, or it really is just a legal access requirement.
So I see a Commissioner Taylor, yes.
Yeah, Janessa, can you just give me just a little bit of an understanding of where 20 feet came from? Because I know, even though, like you said, it's arbitrary, usually you're quite thoughtful. And so what are the considerations you included when you came up with 20 feet?
I think that we kind of felt like somewhere between a 10 to 20 foot access would be most likely for if they were going to create like a path or an entrance to the open space area. So again, since we're not prescribing what that access would be, we're not requiring it to be a path or anything in particular. We're trying to anticipate or to prevent there being a problem if there was a common open space area that not everybody in the development had access to, legal access to. So it really is, Commissioner Taylor, and I cringe to say it, but it really is a bit of an arbitrary starting point. And I think that if you have a better suggestion for a dimension, given all of these things that I'm saying, that we're not prescribing what that looks like, staff would be, interested to hear that.
So do you mind, Chair, if I continue? So I guess since it's a minimum, I live near Hendricks Park, and there are some of these public access points. Unless there's some kind of objective. Anyways, because it's a minimum, I guess I would propose 10 feet. Just to encourage and allow for more flexibility for housing and meeting other requirements because of the complexity of the other, balancing all the various code compliance that would be applicable. So I guess a minimum 10 feet, and obviously if the access is a roadway, 20 feet makes a little bit more sense. If we're going to start to see vehicular, some other kind of modality using it, including potentially doubling up that access with maybe fire safety, because there isn't. So I guess just if we're going to have a minimum, I guess my preference would be 10 feet, unless you really have a concern about it and you've thought about something I haven't. Because once again, I don't love arbitrary. So I guess I'd lean towards a little bit more flexibility.
I've got Commissioner Borowski followed by Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, when I think about this, my mind all goes to the, when you go to the coast and you drive down to the end of the roads and there's beach access, you look at that and I think of that and I think that's probably about 20 feet. You may have stuff on the sides that is limiting, and the path may be 8 to 10 feet. So I think I'm okay with 20 feet, and I also am okay with 20 feet. Just again, I hear what Commissioner Taylor is saying regarding the taking space that could be used to build houses. But also if it's a common open space and somebody gets hurt there and the ambulance needs to drive through, 10 feet is pretty skinny. So I think I'm okay with 20 feet.
Commissioner Edwards.
I'm kind of following, thank you. I'm kind of following with Commissioner Borowski's comments, and just that my thought was just, I don't know if there is a set standard for accessibility for anything from, you know, a vehicle that may need to access. I don't mean that you know, the residents driving around in there. I'm saying, like, if there's a need for some sort of utility vehicle, or like Commissioner Borowski said, fire or ambulance or anything like that. If there is a minimum standard that aligns with that, I would be really comfortable with that. I don't know that 10 feet is enough, but something that aligns accessibility for, you know, a necessary purpose. So I don't know if that there's a number there. 20 feet seems plenty, but if it's 16 feet, I'd support that. But I don't really have a problem with the 20. I just want it to be able to be enough to accommodate a need that may arise for something to get to have access.
I've got Commissioner Isaacson, then put myself in here, then Commissioner Taylor, then Commissioner Beeson. Isaacson now.
Yeah, I guess I would ask two things, not to belabor the point, but have we looked at maybe what other communities have done with the same rule and to come up with what their setback is, and also have we reached out maybe to the fire marshal to ask what their recommendation would be given the size of their vehicles or what they're seeing, so that way we have some evidence or some supportive statement to why we came up with the number we're agreeing to.
I'm putting myself in the queue, and I again repeating myself from before and following along with Commissioner Borowski's analogy of the access at the end of the road to the beach. That is exactly what I was thinking of. So if you have a multi-use pathway, it's probably 10 feet wide. Sidewalks are typically 5, which seems a little narrow, so 10 gives you a little bit of growth. Then you can go to your standard 5 feet setback on either side. So then you've got 10 plus 2 5s, 20. 20 makes sense. You can drive on that path if you have to get somebody out of there. So I'm still okay with 20, and I'm going to move now to Commissioner Taylor.
Please let Commissioner Beeson go first. I can
Okay.
do a second round.
Sure. Commissioner Beeson.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I guess I hadn't thought about this a lot until now. I think I'm gonna support Commissioner Taylor. And I think I'd want to come back and emphasize the word minimum in the sentence. I hadn't really thought about it as vehicular access. And so I guess what I'd say, I think the idea of allowing for a minimum of 10, the developer's going to have some say over this in the design of the tract or the development. If they want wider, that's allowed. If they're planning to have potentially vehicles and so on, they could provide for that. We don't even know if there'll be planting in there or anything else. So I think the kind of recognizing all the way through this, as we've talked about it over a number of meetings, we've been trying to focus in, at least in part, on considering the need for housing as we do all this. So with all of that, if that makes sense, I think the idea of saying a minimum of 10 feet would be acceptable to me. Thanks.
Now, Commissioner Taylor.
So here's one of the examples where I think about it is a project in Florence, for instance. This open space connection was actually only 20 feet long. So it was between one public right-of-way and another public right-of-way, and there was a need for the continuation of this connection to the public right-of-way. So I just think 20 feet for an extended for essentially a 20 feet wide. So you got a 20 by 20. So there's just, I think Commissioner Beeson actually said it well. I just look at it as a minimum. I can support 20. I like to provide the flexibility just because I'm not saying house is going to be located right adjacent to it. It's just there are a lot of other development standards that are being balanced, and the context could be quite different. So really, if we're talking about a 10-foot connection, now you've got a 20-foot wide by 10-foot length. I mean, so you're allowing the design team to actually have a minimum and then design appropriately for the development. And when you get to life safety, typically you don't see development kind of short-circuiting safety. So anyways. And there are other review bodies that are going to be looking at concerns around safety. And 10 feet's adequate for ADA, more than adequate than the 3 feet width that's required, which is inappropriate. We need it to be more of a multi-use path. So I guess my follow-up question, just out of curiosity, is West Eugene Wetlands often has banks on both sides. I guess I would ask, what's the width? I tried to Google it while we were on. What's the width of West Eugene Wetlands path? It's actually quite nice. It's not 20 feet, but it's quite nice. You can get walkers and bikers, and there's enough room to move out of the way. It's actually a nice width. It's, like I said, it's not 20 feet. I'm thinking it's around 10, but anyways, yeah.
So there's a couple clarifications that I can do here. One is that I appreciate the mention that it is minimum requirement. So we're setting that minimum, and with it being a minimum requirement, if there are other design factors or requirements that require the developer or designer to increase that width, that's fine. There's nothing to prohibit it. The 20 does not, it's not going to prevent fire access from being able to require appropriate access if there's a need for that. I think that the 10-foot, I'd like to hear Gabe's take on that. I'm not thinking of anything immediately that because it's a minimum that bothers me. I do know that we've called it out that the common open space tracts do not need to meet lot standards. This is again, the street frontage requirement just to ensure that there's the legal access there. But in terms of the path or how that is used to actually access the open space, that really will be a design decision. Gabe, you want to?
Thanks, Jeanette. Yeah, I think if the intent all along has been to just ensure that the residents have physical access by way of frontage, as opposed to establishing a minimum, for example, of a two-way driveway aisle, which would be 20 feet, or a minimum fire access width of 20 feet. If it really is about the intent to have residents be able to walk to and physically gain access to a common open space, then 10 feet seems appropriate. If we were talking about a public access way that had to be improved to multi-use standards, we'd be looking at anywhere from 10 to 14 feet. So I think we're in the ballpark here. And I do think something less than 20 would be fine, given the intent of this new standard.
Okay, so I'm going to push us forward here. And Janessa, to make sure I'm okay with procedure-wise, a straw poll on reducing the 20-foot minimum to 10 feet. Am I asking the right question? So those in favor of reducing, it's a 10-foot minimum, by the way. So I'm going to jump on board with this, the minimum language. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hands up. Those opposed to reducing from 20 to 10, that would be 1, which is, I'm sorry, I have to single you out, Commissioner Borowski, so people listening at home can know. So 6-1, Borowski on the negative. With that, I think we can move our way on to the next item.
Well, actually, now we can move on to what the item had, which was the adding the exception language. So I think that should be straightforward now that we've got the 10-foot out of the way.
I do too, but let's give a pause here to be sure we're okay there. All right, hands for the original alteration, which was adding the language to make an exception if all properties already abutted the open space.
Correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 0. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So the next item was item number 38, and that was we again added some language to address. There was a question in testimony about the requirement in the PUD requirements when in the South Hills area, and it had to do with the area over 900 feet elevation, and staff proposed some language just to clarify and make it abundantly clear that this subsection does not preclude the addition of an accessory dwelling on any legal lot. So we just need to do a straw poll and make sure that you are okay with the addition of that language as well.
Let's show our hands. All those in favor of that, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 0.
Great. Okay, so then I'm going to save the final vote on all the other highlights, and now we'll move on to some of the follow-up items and a couple added clarifications that staff came upon as we were doing the changes and doing the follow-up information. So the first follow-up item was a minor revision suggested by staff to add clarity on a transition standards, and this had to do with I'm going to share my screen on this one so that you can see the language.
I'm sorry, Janessa, can you, where are we? Sorry, did we jump down to follow-up item 1?
We are on follow-up item 1,
Okay.
correct. Sorry about that. I'll mention the item we're on. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Yes, okay. Sorry, not a lot of head nods. So this is the language up here, just to clarify on the slope setback, that it's a 25, starts at a point 25 feet above the grade at the property line, just to make it clear where that 25 feet is starting. And then another clarification, it's kind of intuitive, but just to clarify that it's toward the interior of the property. So that one, and we don't have to straw poll that one, unless you want to talk about it and if there's any concerns with that language. We could, otherwise we can just include it with the final straw poll. I'm seeing some head nods, and it doesn't seem like a lot of interest to talk about, so we'll move on. The next item was related to straw poll 3, and we have additional revised suggestion that came up because of the limitation to 25 feet. So I'm going to jump to this part again. So when one of the straw polls, the straw poll 3 was to set a limit on the impact of the new proposed transition standards to only apply within 25 feet of the property line that's abutting one of the zones that triggers the standards. And so we made that change and then realized that the options 3 and 4 both had setback requirements that were in excess of 25 feet. So given all the discussion that you've had around the need for housing and kind of looking at our proposed standards and not wanting to create unnecessary obstacles, our recommendation is to combine options 3 and 4 to a simple option 3 that would be a 25-foot setback. And again, in the context of how the changes to the other standards were, we proposed dropping the requirement to plant trees along the property line. So this would be a kind of a straight 25-foot, which is 20 feet greater than this typical standard setback for most residential zones. So it would be a significantly increased spatial separation, but then we would still allow all of the uses that we had addressed in both of those standards to begin with that could be parking. So there may be landscaping that is put in that 25-foot setback area if it's required due to perimeter parking landscaping requirements or something like that. But we wouldn't be requiring the trees spaced at 20 feet on center. Any questions on this?
Okay, so we want to straw poll this one, Janessa? Is that our procedure now?
Yeah, this one is significant enough. I think a straw poll on that language would be good.
Okay, so show of hands in favor. And I must say, I think I like simplifying this. I think it keeps us well within our intention. So show of hands to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How am I? 1, 2. Oh, there it is. 7. Got it. People keep moving around. Just stay in your boxes. Very confusing.
Okay, so item 3 of follow-up items is related to the straw poll 15 that you requested a refined definition of building so that it was clear that sheds or other, minor low value improvements are not going to prevent street connectivity. So this was the solution that staff came up with to clarify the definition of building. And I'll open it up to questions or discussion. None? So now a straw poll vote then on this item and acknowledging staff's follow-up proposed language is acceptable.
Okay, hands up for that. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Borowski, I'm sorry, Commissioner Borowski.
I'm sorry.
You have a question?
I have a question on this one.
Of course.
I think we're getting to where we're at. My only concern was a detached garage can be a significant building in my mind. If you had a nice house with a 3-car detached garage, and we said for street connectivity, you needed to tear that down because it did it. I mean, a shed, I don't know. It just gave me a little bit pause when I saw detached garage as one of the items that would not, would have to come down to do street connectivity. So that's just one of the reasons I wanted to ask questions about that. I mean, if it's a little single carport or something, I understand that, but a detached garage can be a fairly significant investment on a piece of property. So I had issues with that.
So I got Commissioner Edwards.
Well, I was maybe thinking, thank you, that this might be a point of clarification, but would a garage require a certificate of occupancy? So I guess my question is, could it be aligned with a requirement to have a bona fide certificate of occupancy that would satisfy? Because I agree with Commissioner Borowski, but I don't know what other kind of qualifying criteria might exist out there that we could align with that, if that makes sense.
If I could respond to that real quick. This is one where I'd like to point out that you can still go through an adjustment review to get an adjustment, and the adjustment review does help address other buildings or other things. And so that's a way to get into that more discretionary, if there's an argument to be made that a detached garage, doesn't fit the typical mold of, unfinished and, not incredibly expensive structure. I think that we want to be careful here. From a staff perspective, I would caution a little bit of not making these outright exceptions too wide open, because street connectivity is important. I think that while we want to have that flexibility and path for some relief, if it's justified, under the constraints of clear and objective, this exception needs to be very cut and dry. And so I think teasing apart kind of the detached garage possibility, it might make more sense to let that argument be made under the discretionary adjustment review process, but to keep this not just allowing a straight out detached garage to justify not meeting street connectivity. Gabe, this is one that I'd really like to get your input on too, because you have a lot more experience with these developments and when we require, and maybe when we've used the existing building exception in the past under discretionary.
Sure, happy to contribute a little bit here. While I wasn't involved in the initial discussion, as I understand it, the commission had some concern about sort of the ends of the spectrum, whereas any building as it was originally crafted could be, for example, a very inexpensive, dilapidated shed, for example. And on the other hand, you may have, in the case of certain situations, a much more expensive structure. And so, as I understand it, Janessa worked with Lauren to help hone in on a definition that's sort of middle of the road in terms of what would be excluded. I do think that Janessa has a good point in that, the objective here is really to be as clear as possible with defined terms in the existing code, and not to try to establish some arbitrary value or a dollar amount, for example, as to the value of the structure. And so this does provide that kind of balance point, I think, in terms of refining the definition, but still with the backdrop of allowing adjustment review. If, for example, there was a detached garage of particularly high value, they wouldn't be able to just take advantage of the exception, but then could get an adjustment. So I think it's kind of a balance point between specificity and then when an applicant would have to go through the discretionary adjustment review to get that exception.
Okay, so the issue before us is the definition of structure. And before, when we talked about this, we wanted to, as I recall, we wanted to keep housing units if we could, but not get held up on sheds or other kinds of structures. So this seems like it drew a pretty hard line, and there's an alternative path here through alternative reviews. If adjustment reviews, if someone wanted that, I don't know how we could get into whether something is a very expensive structure and that somehow precludes it. That seems like a place we can't go. Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I very much appreciate Janessa and Gabe's feedback. I also appreciate Commissioner Borofsky's garages, especially if we're talking about older developments. So if you've got a property owner and they want to maintain a house, I just think in like the Fairmount neighborhood, if you have a proposed development, the housing stock is a little older. Many of the garages are detached. I guess my argument would be on the other side is why not exclude detached garages? They're actually a large component of kind of meeting standards. Like you potentially are meeting the parking standard. You've got storage within a car. It's kind of, it's often part of housing development. So I guess I am kind of on the fence with that. It's like, why not take it? I love that shed's taken out. But I think of most houses, they're going to have a garage, whether it's attached or detached. So, anyways, I'm on the fence there. I think I probably would be more on the side of just letting it, just taking it out. But yeah. So if staff wants to add anything to that, I guess that's my thought. So
Commissioner Taylor, and if I'm understanding this right, we would add the words detached garage up under the section where we are talking about occupied structure.
Or it could be an exception. I mean, I like the occupied structure. I really like that. It's very clear. I always think of a house has a garage, and not always. I mean, you've got units, but they'll have a storage unit maybe attached. Anyways, it could be just an exception. But if that, so thought.
Yeah. Well, okay. Other comments, other commissioners? I've got Commissioner Borowski, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I just brought it up because it seemed like could be a fairly significant building. Can you help me out with, if it goes through the discretionary track, is that a planning director's decision? And what is that process? As far as who gets to say, yes, that I agree that that's worth not having connectivity or not? And is that an appealable thing? Just, if you could run me through that just a little bit, that might help me get to where I need to be.
Gabe, I'm going to defer to you if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Sure. So the typical adjustment review is a type 2 planning director level decision, right? And so if you want to take a look at the criteria for that, I would look back to Janessa to see if we can pull that up, if need be. But in effect, I would venture a guess that it still needs to meet the intent, right, of the street connectivity standards to provide interconnected public streets in most cases. So without looking at those discretionary criteria, I would just tell you that it's a planning director decision that is appealable. The criteria are discretionary as the alternative to meeting these new standards. And then it would be final at the local level upon, say, an appeal to the hearings official, right? And then beyond that, potentially any appeals would go on up to LUBA.
And the language is up on the screen now for at least for the clear and objective adjustment review criteria.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm on the fence on this one as well. So thank you.
Okay, so commissioners, in an effort to move us forward on this issue, I will have a show of hands for leaving the language as was proposed by staff, which I believe leaves the detached garage still out of the loop, so to speak, in elegant language here. Yes. So in other words, let's have a show of hands for what was proposed by the staff in the text. And if that fails, then we'll circle back and try to get the language in the right order. So all those who support the staff proposed language as it is, a show of hands now. I've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can do my math. That is not 4. So therefore, we're back to inserting language into changing this. And how, maybe Janessa, you have a suggestion for how to do that.
So real quick, I just want to, can I have the 3 that voted for that one raise your hands again so I can make sure I caught?
Very good, very good. So that the 3 were Commissioners Ramey, Isaacson, and Fregula.
Okay. Okay, so it seems like the sticking point would be to remove the detached garage that was included as not being considered a existing building or a building for the purpose of this section. So that would be the straw poll would be to approve the language as proposed with the exception of striking detached garage from the list of structures not considered a building.
Janessa, I'm not sure that will quite work, but I think you could do a straw poll with the understanding that generally, well, not even generally, the Planning Commission is in favor of allowing occupied structures and detached garages for purposes of the exception, and then all other structures that are not designed and used just solely for, other structures that are designed and used solely for storage or shelter that are not occupied structures or detached garages, including a list of other types of structures, are not enough to trigger the exemption. And then you and I can wordsmith exactly what that looks like and bring it back to Planning Commission.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor, you have a question?
Yeah, quick question. I want to know if this helps some of the other planning commissioners and Janessa, sorry, my code is behind me, but is detached garage defined? Is that something that might be helpful so that you don't get somebody throwing a shed in, calling it a detached garage? I mean, I don't know. I'm seeing Gabe I don't know if that's helpful. So I don't know what that means, but really I'm thinking about it more as a classic garage that's serving not somebody coming in and say, well, it's really a garage, but it's only 8 feet wide and there's no way a car, it's essentially a shed. So if you're splitting hairs and concerned about that, I don't know if that's something you can address.
Commissioner Taylor, I'm sorry if I might jump in, Sherry. That's an excellent point, Commissioner Taylor. And I think one of the reasons that it's currently defined the way it is because it's an easy split to say occupied and other. Once you get to kind of what is a garage versus a shed versus some other type of unoccupied structure, it starts to become trickier to define. And so Janessa and I can certainly work on that if that is the will of the commission, but it is a harder thing to do to hone in on what constitutes a detached garage versus some other kind of unoccupied structure used for storage, maybe vehicles, maybe not.
And I will say just that is precisely my concern about this is that how do we define garage? I know we have an image in our minds, but I can also imagine 3 or 4 other images that others might have in their minds. So Commissioner Beeson, you're up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got a lot to add. I guess I was compelled by the discussion where the detached garage might be a bit more substantial, permanent sort of facility or building. And I kind of like the idea of excluding it, pulling it out. I was sort of waiting to see, what an exclusion looks like, or if it might end up somewhere else. I guess I like the idea of pulling it out of this and maybe some work being done on trying to define that a bit. And we could look at it February 9th.
Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, and again, for me, maybe one of the ways to get to it is a detached garage that has an associated curb cut and vehicular access point to it, something like that, maybe a way to get to it. I don't know. But yeah, I agree with Commissioner Taylor that somebody could just call it a garage, but my intent on my vote was what we all believe a garage is. So figuring that out and clear and objective standards is staff's quandary.
Okay, so I still think we need to finish up our business with a straw poll here that at this point direct staff to return to us on January 9th with appropriate language that does what we told you we want to do, or at least 4 of us have. So all those who, was that clear enough? I'm sorry, I rambled there a little bit too much. Was that clear enough?
I'd actually like to get Lauren to help me out on capturing this one clearly, because this is a little bit more than a quick and easy change. Lauren?
Yeah, thanks, Janessa. So I think what I heard is that at least 4 commissioners would like staff to return with language for an exemption that's triggered by an occupied structure or a detached garage, and some clear and objective language around what constitutes a detached garage.
And we heard that defined today as actually used or possibly to be used by car storage. I think that was where the curb cut and access to the right of way. And that makes sense to me. If we can somehow define that, because that was, again, Commissioner Taylor's point of view, well, you have required things. So let's see if we can capture those. And yes, Commissioner Taylor, I see your hands up.
So, you know, I know it is complicated, and I recognize that when I was kind of on that fence with Commissioner Borofsky. I mean, I'd like if we can be able to do this. And really, I'm not sure it's really, I would like to use tools that get at size, if that makes sense. So it's an associated, so let's say somebody has a detached garage and they're actually not storing their cars, they're actually storing, they're using it as a gym or something, whatever it is. I'm less concerned about that, where when you start to talk about cars, you talk about size, because there's a minimum size. So I don't know. I was thinking Bend has maybe in some of the design review where they might have a definition of a detached garage that actually is more associated with the house. So I'm thinking about, you know, I'm thinking about my neighborhood. Essentially, Fairmount neighborhood has a lot of lovely detached garages. And it's obvious where there's a shed and a detached garage. And a lot of it is based on height, width, length. It looks more like it was built at the time of the house. And so I recognize this is complicated, but if there are ways we can describe it that are indicating size, or maybe there's a minimum, I'm kind of at a loss. I would need to spend some time. But I definitely can look through other codes and that I've looked at and potentially share something if that's helpful.
Commissioner Isaacson, and then I've got Lauren Summers.
Yeah, so this issue actually comes up a lot in Chicago when I was doing my master's there. I mean, nobody has an attached garage. Everyone has a detached garage. And what could be exceedingly exaggerated as a shed versus a garage? The minimum is 12 by 20. That is the minimum for a one-car garage, and it goes up from there. So I don't know if we're going to use that as a standard or go and look at other jurisdictions, but 12 by 20 for a one-car garage is the standard by which everyone, at least over there, uses.
Thank you. Lauren Summers.
I just wanted to reflect back to the commission what I feel like I've heard in terms of criteria that commissioners are thinking about to kind of focus in on a detached garage versus some other type of structure. And the criteria that I have heard are dimensions, for sure. And then Commissioner Borofsky talked about a curb cut. I think it hasn't been explicitly mentioned, but I feel like I'm hearing possibly the presence of an occupied structure on the same lot. So it is a garage that is associated with a dwelling, not just a structure kind of standing alone on a lot. And so given all that, I'm hopeful we can bring you something back. I think, again, you know, because we have to make these standards clear and objective, you may end up with a set of standards that will capture most, but not all detached garages, and may capture some other structures that are not exactly what we're thinking about, but, you know, meet the definition. And so if commission is, you know, okay with that, then we can move forward. And well, when we bring you back some language, we can talk about all of that. But I just wanted to kind of say that's what I'm hearing and give Janessa a chance to weigh in if she's hearing something else, or I'm seeing kind of head nods. So I think we're on the right track.
Okay, terrific. So now we're all the way back to where I was before I asked for help clarifying what we were voting on. So if there are there any other questions about what we're voting on? So we're voting on adding the detached garage to the list of structures that would be
Exempt.
Exempt, thank you. So show of hands in favor of that language change. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those not in favor of that. And this will be easier for you keeping track at home. That's Commissioners Ramey and Fregula opposed.
Can I also request that the record indicates the original vote as well?
Can you repeat that, Commissioner Fragla? I heard a.
I didn't see the original 3-4 vote recorded, and I was hoping the record could include that, please.
Yes. With my space requirement here, I don't have it, but I do have it on my notes on my. So I will have it on my list. Okay, I think we have direction on that, and Lauren and I will work on that language and return on the 9th with that one. So we'll move on to the next follow-up item, which was also related to the street connectivity. And this was the one on the providing, okay, so I'm gonna back up really quick. This one has 2 parts to it. Part of it is follow-up from the direction that you gave staff to come back with an appropriate proposed percentage of the development site that would be required for dedication in order to qualify for the exemption to meeting street connectivity. The second part was a little bit of staff noticed that the intersecting street language was a little bit confusing and could imply that you actually needed to have an intersection. And that wasn't necessarily the intent. The intent was to, when you're providing a street connection. So there's this minor revision here to change it from an intersecting street to a public street connection. And then the other part was the follow-up information that we provided based on some previous subdivisions that have been approved and how much right-of-way was required.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. First off, I would just want to say, and I haven't had the chance to do this, but this last packet was put together in such a great way for us to go through and be able to do it. Having the links to the code section, the links to the webcast, and then all of these things in this section where you showed us plot maps, it really, really helped me visualize a lot of this stuff and be able to go back, because you know we've been going back and forth on all of this. So yeah, I think I can live with the 25%. The only thing that I did notice on a lot of those plot maps, those weren't ones that were in, there weren't very many ones that were in hilly areas, and that's where, you know, it might be a little bit more problematic at 25%, but I think that we've seen enough. I saw enough there that it was middle ground, and we do have the importance of street conductivity. But again, I just wanted, this was just fabulously put together, Janessa. I really want to applaud you on this. It was made our work so much easier. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, any other discussions or praise for Janessa's work? Okay, with that, I think we're ready to straw poll this one. All those in favor of the adjustments as in our package here, show your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 0.
Okay. This one I'm going to jump to. This next one was another one that we don't necessarily need to straw poll it, but it was suggested language change. And this was one, Commissioner Taylor, you brought up the language in this, and there's 2 mirrored sections, the applicability for tentative partitions and for tentative subdivisions. So Gabe and I especially really went back through this language to try to make sure we felt like it was saying what we wanted it to say, and kind of, it's really reiterating requirements that are already there that don't allow, or that kind of dictate when you can apply for development permits and whatnot. So, but we did feel like adding this language made it more abundantly clear, pointing to those other sections. And so I'm really curious, especially Commissioner Taylor, to hear your feedback on this one. So.
Good.
Okay, then I think we're ready to or we can skip the straw poll on that and include it in the highlighted text at the end. So then the next one is another one where we don't necessarily have to do a straw poll, but I'll show this language. So again, when I rewatched all of our webcasts and was making sure that I captured everything, something that really jumped out at me when we were talking about the open space were a couple things. One was we kind of talked a little bit about maybe capping, or, you know, if because of concerns about how onerous this standard could be, one of the options would be to do the 1 acre cap, which the more I thought about it, really makes sense to me. And when you consider that we're replacing an existing standard that was a 1 acre on-site open space provision if they weren't within the quarter mile from a public park. So I think that it ties nicely to the existing requirement and does put that upper cap so that we're not going to have this huge amount of open space required out of a private development. So the cap at 1 acre is the first thing that that we should straw poll or discuss.
Okay, any discussion on the 1 acre cap? Hearing none, then let's show our hands for straw poll on that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 0. Great.
So that one. Okay, we did it. So capture.
Commissioner Edwards, you have a question? Yes, Commissioner Edwards.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the unmute button. Does it allow them to, if a developer chooses to go larger than the 1 acre, is that still a choice? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So then the next one is related to the so same thing related to the the open space for PUDs. And we talked a lot about it, but didn't actually straw poll it, but there was talk about not requiring it for multifamily projects and acknowledging that the multifamily standards already require an open space requirement. So this was the way that staff looked at adding that, was to modify up here so that we're adding a third subparagraph C that would then say compliance with multifamily standards constitutes basically compliance with this section.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. I'm in favor of this, but I do have a question. If a PUD has both multifamily and single family in the same PUD, would it be, so if we've got a 30 acre parcel and 10 acres of it's going to be multifamily, 20 acres of it's going to be single family, would this say that the single family one's area of that PUD would not require the open space because it's got multifamily? And there are examples of that where it's, some are mixed use, some are condos, some are single family.
Correct. And that's great that you brought that up. And we did think about that and wondered about whether we should break it out. However, it gets very complicated to try to start distinguishing that. And then when we really were considering what would be lost or gained by doing that, if there's a multifamily component to the development, usually it's not going to be a tiny little component. So assuming that it's of some significant size, like 25 or 30% of the development site, you're still going to get a decent amount of open space from the multifamily standards. And this is one that it may not be worth trying to create the complicated matrix of what to do in a mixed development, as opposed to running the risk that there may be a little bit how do I want to put this? There may be a development that we're not anticipating that triggers this requirement, which, as a reminder, this requirement's already unlikely to be triggered very often, just because We are already changing it from a quarter mile to an open space to half a mile. So that greatly, increased the number of properties that are around Eugene that are, not even going to trigger this requirement. And so I think that it would be okay if multifamily standards apply. But that is something that if you're concerned about that and would like to ensure more common open space, we could look at and bring back on the 9th proposal for how to kind of tease that apart. I'll just say it would get kind of complicated because then we start having to really describe exactly how you measure out what constitutes the multifamily portion of the development site versus the other side. So, Gabe, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm fairly new to the draft language, but what I would point out is just a plain reading of this section, that with the exception under subsection C, I would argue that the remaining portion of subsection B would still apply to anything other than multifamily development. So you mentioned trying to tease out, well, what is the portion that is, say, single family residential? And I would point out that the standard itself refers to the average lot area. So we would be looking at the average of lot areas for single family development within that portion of a larger PUD to determine what additional common open space would be needed for the non-multifamily portion, right? So in other words, the way it's constructed now, I read it in that it would apply to both components of a project like that, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I was just concerned that if somebody had a big thing and they put a 6-unit apartment on one corner of it, that might null and void the open space thing. But it sounds like it was teased out, and I'm comfortable with it. I just wanted to know that people had thought about it.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
The only thing I kind of was thinking about the same thing, Gabe. I am a little concerned about this or. And that would be my only concern is if you wanted to, because I was thinking about in a situation where you have a PUD, a subdivision, I can think of examples where you could actually easily divide out, X acres or single family, X acres or multifamily, so that you could do it. Now, if they're commingled, which does happen where you have, some mud, and I think I think it could get at what you're talking about, Gabe, with maybe an and or. I don't know, I think that or needs to be addressed. That's my only,
I was going to mention that, Commissioner Taylor, but and Lauren, I was going to ask your opinion on this, whether to make that more clear, if we could do subparagraph A or B and C, because then we're basically kind of invoking both B and C if you're not doing A, if you don't need A.
And the one thing, Janessa, before Lauren answers that, there might be a way, what I, kind of channeling Gabe, for instance, is that if you're actually reviewing it, and for that matter, you get a development if there's a conflict. So maybe some kind of language that says the structure apply. I mean, I don't know, teasing out what happens if one is in conflict with the other, because that will definitely pose a question if you're doing an and in a B and C. So I would just look at it closer to make sure that's not created.
I think for clarity, if the commission has a concern about ensuring that, I guess to use Commissioner Borowski's example, you have very small multifamily in one corner of the development site, and that would end up with a very small amount of open space, or open space that is less than would be required under the open space standards. I think we do need to think about how to phrase this a little bit differently, Janessa. I agree with you that and Commissioner Taylor, the or is maybe the sticking point. I'm also thinking about maybe whichever is greater standard, or I think there are some other ways that we could approach this. But I do think if that is a concern, we could probably take a stab at clarifying a little bit more and come back to you on the 9th.
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
Sorry, I'm just going to be a devil's advocate here. There's a part of me that now I'm going to talk about. I like the multifamily standards. I think they do a pretty good job. And let's say it was applied throughout the entire development site. When you're talking about a level of density, I would like to once again encourage housing. I mean, that's what House Bill 2001 is for. So as long as the multifamily development standards and are basically you've got to achieve them throughout the entire development site, I'm okay with it, actually. I just was talking about in terms of other concerns by other commissioners. But so I actually am okay as long as one of them, and if it's less restrictive, if you're expanding density, I think it's great, actually.
I will say that the multifamily standards apply to any new building and the portion of the development site impacted by the multifamily development. So we wouldn't apply the multifamily standard open space to the single family lot portion of it. So the risk would be, but to that point, and what you just said, the risk would be not requiring too much or as much open space, not requiring too much in terms of over applying the multifamily standards.
That's great. Thanks for the clarification, because I was basically, if they're commingled, you're right, that gets too complicated. So then going back to the first discussion makes more sense. If you couldn't say the entire development then is a multifamily once you integrate. Yep, that's great. Thank you for the clarification, of course.
I'm thinking that it seems like there's not any major issue to adding this exception or acknowledgement of the multifamily open space requirements. So maybe we do a straw poll to agree, to accept staff's proposal to do this and have us further look at the language and come back on the 9th with any fine tuning that we recommend based on Lauren's input.
Okay, is that clear enough to the commissioners? I see some head nodding. So I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote on this one. All those in favor, show me your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Very good.
Oops. Capturing my quick notes. Okay, so the final one is similar to the tentative partition language that we already looked at. So this was just those two added language or bits of language. So we don't have to straw poll that one specifically and can include it. Oops, sorry, and can include it with the overall straw poll on all the highlighted changes and edits not specifically addressed.
Okay.
Which I think we're kind of at that point, unless we want to open it up for any questions or concerns that we haven't specifically gone over that you wanted to elevate at the end of the discussion. Now's the time for that. I do want to mention a couple things. Commissioner Beeson had sent me an email this weekend with a couple fixes that were related to the combination of the options 3 and 4 from the transition standards, and there's another reference within the transition standards that needs to change based on that change. So I just wanted to kind of point out that if you notice anything like that, please send me a quick email. Those are kind of cascading reference fixes that can happen, and we're going to be going through with a fine-tooth comb as we put together the ordinance language for the council public hearing. And so we may catch more of those. They're not substantive, and we can make those changes. We don't need to bring those back to Planning Commission for straw poll votes or anything. But that said, if you came across anything, I definitely would love to hear about it. And a quick, simple email to me, just pointing me to that would be sufficient. The other thing in Commissioner Beeson's email, he mentioned the findings, and the draft findings were part of your November 23rd packet. And those are definitely moving forward with your formal recommendation. Your formal recommendation is really specific to the draft code. However, the findings, this is your time to kind of look at and provide feedback and input on those findings if you have any suggested edits or feedback that you want to give staff. What I was thinking of is to ask if you could send me those. If you've looked at them and you don't have comments, that's great. If you haven't had a chance to, maybe if you could look at them in the next week and get me any feedback that you have, then I can wrap that into making any edits to them as necessary and include a clean version or current version of the draft findings with the AIS packet for the February 9th meeting. So my vision is that for the February 9th meeting, you'll have a very simple AIS, but with 2 attachments, and one will be the draft code with all of your edits and all the highlighting taken out, with the exception of these 2 follow-up items that we'll be returning with there. And then the findings would be back in front of you, just so that it's clear that that's the package moving forward.
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
I just, once again, I know we all celebrated you. You've done a phenomenal job. I mean, I didn't think there was room for you to step it up. And in this last AIS, you stepped it up. So really great. Very easy. So when would you like us to get that feedback to you? What's our deadline?
Monday.
Great. Okay.
Okay, a whole week. Perfect. So Janessa, you also wanted a straw poll on all the changes that were not straw polled.
Correct.
Just to button things up, and then also some time for anybody else to bring up anything else they might have thought of in the 6 months we've been working on this, but hasn't come up. Okay.
Which I would say let's do that first, just in case we need to pull something.
Okay, so first then open forum on issues that did not come up through, I guess it could be public comment or for any reason, the commissioners would like to bring up at this point related to the clear and objective housing code amendments. Commissioner Taylor, yes. And Commissioner Brock.
I'm willing to abandon this, but because we are on clear and objective and encouraging housing, I really would love to get rid of, it's the only application, PUDs require professionals to sign on the title sheet. Each professional, they need to sign their name, and that takes time and effort. And all of their individual documents are signed by those licensed professionals. It's super redundant, but I do have to say it's like this administralia that if we can remove just because it is time consuming and it is redundant, I would love it. So, and it's been recommended in testimony. So it's not just mine, it is a very common. So anyways, just that's a audacious goal.
The kind of thing we were trying to capture. So very good. Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask staff and maybe the rest of the commission, when this process was initiated by council years ago, it was with the idea of increasing the way that we can get housing built. It was one of the tools and strategies to try and help us get housing built easier and less complicated. And I guess what I would ask of staff and some of the people who work with this, are we achieving that goal by doing this? I hope so, because it was a lot of work and a lot of good work. But I guess just off the cuff, is this going to make it easier to get housing built in our community?
I'll listen to Commissioner Taylor's response first, and then I have a few thoughts too.
I've been watching that also, Commissioner Borowski, and I think Janessa said it really well, because I started this more later version of Clear and Objective when we picked it back up, is this idea of how is this interfacing with us addressing kind of the updates of the code relative to the House Bill 2001, 2003. So I actually look at it as, let's get through Clear and Objective, and then when we get to the housing portion, we might need to be relooking at some of these standards. Is that we're kind of a little offset here. So, and we haven't had a full process to kind of understand how the community, we've got a very robust public process in relation to House Bill 2001 and those required changes. So to answer your question, I've kind of compartmentalized this, and I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alyssa, Janessa, Gabe, is that there will be another kind of lens and view of the code relative to House Bill 2001 that could touch these sections again, with just a more highlighted lens. So.
Yeah, and I would say that, so going back to when council initiated this came out of the expansion of the urban growth boundary, or looking at the expansion and the fact that it was not expanded to add land for housing development. And one of the things that came out of there was the difficulty in developing the lands that remain within Eugene, because kind of the easy things have already been taken care of. We've talked about that a lot. And so they were kind of twofold. The land that's left got more difficulty to navigate in designing and developing it. And two, the housing builders were saying that the existing needed housing track wasn't very friendly. It had obstacles. And so it was kind of twofold. It's like, you're right, we want to encourage housing development. We want it to be efficient. We also want to effectively address our community goals and values. This isn't the end all be all project to remove all barriers to housing, or to go as necessarily as deep as, say, like the housing tools and strategies or the House Bill that have a more specific focus. There was a goal on Clear and Objective to both remove barriers and make it more effective. A lot of the changes that we're doing are streamlining the process, allowing concurrent review right there alone allows you to overlap something that could be a 6-month process that you had to do in series before, and now you can do in tandem. So there are some big wins, in my opinion, for making the process more efficient and better for developing housing. There's also a few things that came up as important to the stakeholders that wanted to kind of address more livability issues. And so the transition standards and the tree preservation are the two that stand out to me as there being any room for thinking that there could be a conflict with removing barriers to housing, but adding these requirements. But to me, it gets to the importance of harmonizing everything. We do want to absolutely be, facilitate building housing, and we don't want to, lower the bar to nothing and not address keeping Eugene an awesome place to live. And so I feel like that's been our focus, is to right size the standards if we're adding standards in, or if we're changing them. The tree standards is the standout that goes from a very low bar of considering to the robust set of tree preservation and removal standards that you have before you that has taken the most time in work sessions to get through and dig through. But that's because it's been so important to get it as right as possible. So I'm feeling pretty good that we're at that point, that we've done a lot of a lot of manipulation to the draft code to kind of turn those levers and dials that I talked about when I brought you the conceptual framework back in last January, February. I do think that you've put a lot of thought into how to, you know, fine tune those standards into a place that still gives flexibility, still allows mitigation, and a lot, you know, more mitigation than originally drafted in light of the conversation around housing and finding that balance. So I'm feeling personally pretty good with where the package is, and I do feel like in the standards that we've taken a more, you know, and the standards that we've created or added to, I still feel like those are reasonable and have been really looking at balance. And so I hope that kind of addresses it was a little more pedestal than I was meaning to take.
No, I think that was very helpful. And I see Commissioner Beeson, you've got your hand up. So what have you got?
A couple of things I want to add as I listen to Commissioner Borofsky's question. First off, I agree with Commissioner Taylor, talk about some additional lenses this might be looked through. I've assumed all the way along, or assumed for some period of time, we're going to come back and revisit all of this as we do middle housing, probably in the next 6 or 8 months, if not sooner, or revisit a lot of it. I also, I'm pretty simple about this a lot of the time, although I find as I do this more and more, my complexity is increasing a bit. But one of the things I do, particularly with this project, I got involved in it about 1.5 years ago, and I know it's been going on for a number of years, but I continue on Janessa's material to go back and I look at the goals that are laid out right on page 1 of virtually every AIS that she does. And I did that actually this morning, and talks about goals to accommodate housing on lands available within the UGB, provide clear and objective path to land use approval for housing, and provide a guide for housing development in a way that reflects our community values. And I've tried as we go through, and I think we've been doing a good job of staying on those goals and producing a product here, I think, that we're going to recommend to the council that is consistent with those goals that were laid out some time ago. So I would offer that.
Yes, Commissioner Fragola.
Thank you. So in response to Commissioner Borofsky's sort of reflection question for the commission, I see this as one part of a much broader swath of work that we have to do as a commission. When we take a look back at the Housing Tools and Strategies recommendations, I think there was over 80. And there's a lot more that we can be doing to ensure that we have the capacity to meet the housing needs of our community. So I feel really good about the work that we've done on this. I especially appreciate the effort that Janessa, you have put into this, and as well as some of the commissioners on the commission that have greater expertise helping us drill down to some of this, into some of these areas. But I feel like I feel really good about the work that we've done on this one piece, knowing that there's a lot of other work that needs to be done to ensure that we meet the housing needs of our community.
So I think this conversation is a really good summary of where we are, and excellent time to look back and say, well, how far did we get towards what our goal was, or what our mission was. And I know that when we take it to council, we'll have some sort of introductory memo that talks about these very issues, where this fits in the whole context, what we tried to do, what changed during the process, and the usual, how many people did we talk to, how many months did we spend, how many hours did we talk about how wide the access way should it be 20, should it be 10? So we actually paid attention to what we were doing. And this is that subtext that goes to the council so that they can understand the bigger picture, hopefully, and not just dive into whether there should be an and between subset A and B or an or between subset A and B. So I'm really thinking this conversation today, and I see Commissioner Isaacson would like to get in here as well, but I think that's helping Janesu. I'm looking to you to write this sort of overall, and that will be, I think, part of our package that we see on February 9th as well. And then that or some subset of it will be oral testimony that I will take forward to the council on when they consider these issues. So Commissioner Isaacson, yes.
So I guess my comment would be, I look at the participants on our meetings regularly, and it's almost always just us. I know that it goes out on Community Access TV. I don't know what the viewership is for that, but I mean, we're only as good as the advice that we're given as well. So, we're trying to get through these rule changes, and I hear consistently when I'm talking in the community about how burdensome it is to build, how expensive it is to build. And this is the opportunity for those folks to have a say in that conversation. And I rarely ever hear that. And I would just put it out there for the record for people who do listen and are going to be hearing this later on, that the appropriate measures to see our schedule, have a viewpoint, offer up your suggestions to us via email or public comment or whatever we're going to be doing, so that we can hear that and we're not exposed to essentially a groupthink. So we're not a year from now being told, oh, if we'd only done this. Well, if we'd only done that is great, but decisions are made by those who show up. So we're here, and we encourage everyone else to do so as well.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
So I do want to kind of put out there that there was a high level of involvement. So even though we're not seeing them at the meeting, there was some extensive volunteer time. And so a lot of kind of the detail that I provided, even though I reviewed it separate from the testimony and then included the testimony into my review, just so that I could have clean eyes, is that there were tens, and there was just a lot of time spent. So I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner Isaacson, and I also want to put a shout out for all the people that were highly involved in this process. Yeah, it was great turnout.
Okay, I think we're reaching the end of this agenda item. Janessa, what else do you need from us to move forward?
I think we just need the final straw poll on all of the highlighted edits and changes that weren't specifically addressed in another straw poll.
Okay, hard to imagine that there could be any, but Commissioner Borowski, something you would like to say? Yes.
Yeah, do we want to take up Commissioner Taylor's signing thing? I would be in favor of that if that's not too onerous to add in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for circling back to that. I think we could all agree, and it was my assumption that staff again on the 9th would come back to us with that proposal.
So I want to do a quick check with Gabe and Alyssa real quick on that proposal, and whether is there any discussion that you want to have right now, or are you comfortable if we straw poll and the commission wants to direct us to make that change? Is that feasible? Is that reasonable? I'm a little, this is one of those where that's a requirement that's both discretion, general track and needed housing or clear and objective track. So I also want to be careful, or like, is that okay in terms of the scope of the clear and objective project? What are your thoughts?
Well, I can't really speak to scope, but I would say that the suggestion is a relatively simple surgical change. And so at the culmination of the end of this process, I think that with the caveat that I'd want to go back and look at any potentially unintended consequences, that it's quite possible that it would be a simple thing to strike. I think with the reliance on the notion that the licensure and signature requirements are embedded elsewhere with regard to any one of the plan sheets or the various sort of plan sheets that we might get in a plan you develop set, right? I think one of the things that we would want to look at is maintaining the requirement for a certification of a design team lead, right? So the sort of go-to person on the project, right? Assigning that lead as part of the design team and having clear coordination is something that is often critical to the success of a project like a complex PUD early on in the process. And so I could see the signature requirements of all the participants on the design team falling away, but my inclination at this point is to maintain that requirement to identify a lead on the project.
So it sounds like a straw poll to have staff investigate this option and come back on the 9th with proposed changes to implement it would be appropriate. Okay.
Yeah, that would be like item 41, so we can break into our 40s. That'd be good. So straw poll on coming back to us with the signature issue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-0.
Great. And then the final vote on the.
So here we are, straw poll on what used to be item 40, I guess still item 40. All other changes highlighted within the text of the code. Hands up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect.
I think this might be one of the first meetings that we've ended before the time was up. So.
Oh, what makes you think we're done?
Oh, well, sorry.
Items from staff. Oh, you're so optimistic, Janessa. That's what we love about you. Items from staff now, and we'll probably still be done early, but yes.
I am not going to take 14 minutes, I promise. Just a couple of quick points and then I'll go over some upcoming calendar things. I appreciate hearing your praise for Janessa. We too think she's been doing phenomenal work, and every time she pops out one of those PDFs that links to 1,000 things, she just raises the bar for the rest of us. So yeah, I know those are super helpful for you. Don't expect to see them every time from everybody because we also don't own all those skills. So but it is something we'll aspire to do because I know it's helpful for you to all have that roadmap instead of like where in this pile of, AISs and paperwork is that. So yeah, she really has done fantastic work on this. And I appreciate your questions and your comments on housing affordability. And we think and talk about that topic all of the time and have a lot of, there's not going to be a project that is going to solve that or take care of that or make housing more affordable. It's really going to be a combination of code amendments, plan amendments, programs, that the city can address, from our perspective or our end of it. So, this is just one piece of that, one tool of all of that. So I appreciate your, thinking about that as you look at code amendments, where you can make an impact. So thank you for that. For your schedule, you'll be back tomorrow night for two public hearings actually on there are 2 Metro Plan Amendments, Refinement Plan Amendment, zone change applications for private property. So tomorrow night, 5:30. And then next Monday should be super fun. You'll be doing a deep dive into the middle housing states rules so that you've got a really good handle on that. So when you're doing your deliberations and whatnot, you'll know what you're talking about. And then on the 8th is scheduled currently for your deliberations and recommendations on the Metro Plan amendments. And then obviously February 9th coming back for clear and objective. And then just a couple of council highlights tonight. Terry and team are taking the middle housing code amendments at 5:30 just for an update. It'll be similar to what you saw last time with Healthy Democracy, the Equity Roundtable facilitator, and then Tyler with Eagle Northwest also. So they'll be hearing about similar things to what you heard. And they have a 90-minute work session, so that should be great. And then Wednesday at noon, we're providing them an update on commercial setbacks, which is a code amendment that they had initiated late last year. So we're just giving them an update on what we've heard from some focus groups. And that was something that they requested that we come back and do. And then finally, related to housing affordability and availability and diversity, Staff from community development are going back on March 10th to provide an update on housing tools and strategies. And I'll be sure to send you the agenda and the link for that one, because I think it's going to be one that you're going to want to listen to and see what they're talking about for that one. And it's it's really an update on housing tools and strategies, where we've been and where we're going to, what's next on that. Two things I know I've heard a couple questions on, and you're probably wondering what the heck's going on. I have not scheduled the retreat yet, or a joint work session with the Planning Commission, City Council. In part, I'm waiting to see where things are budget-wise, and I'm also waiting to see what comes out of the housing tools and strategies in terms of what's on our work plan, what we could accommodate on our work plan. I'm thinking that I'm going to schedule March for the retreat, and I think that still gives us plenty of time. And so in case you were wondering what the heck was happening with that, it's still on my radar. It's still on a giant sticky here on my desk. I'm just waiting for a couple of things to fall into place. And then finally, it hasn't come out yet, but it should be time for recruitment for boards and commissions for the city, including the Planning Commission. So unless Commissioner Borowski's changed his mind, we will have a vacancy. And so you all are honestly our very best recruiters for that. So start thinking about, who would make a good planning commissioner. Start thinking about, we've only got one person from the River Road area and one person from Gillum area, and mostly we had a lot of South Eugene. So start thinking about, just diversity of the board as well in all sorts of factors, but, or the commission. So I will send out more information once I hear from city manager's office. I'm sure they're trying to figure out how to do that virtually this year as well. Yeah, just stay tuned on all of that. And that is all I have.
Okay, terrific. Other items from board members or updates, questions for the staff? Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. So I've been talking to some people in the community regarding the work session that Elisa put forward that's coming out on Wednesday on commercial setbacks. There's some in my view, it's could become problematic. Commissioner Zelenka directed staff to do a citywide zone or citywide standards for commercial setbacks, and he did it in a 45-minute work session, which in my opinion isn't the appropriate manner to write code for the entire city of Eugene. I've been hearing that from some other people throughout the community that this may need a deeper dive and looked at, kind of like what we just got done with Clear and Objective. The way the motion is set is that you have a 10-foot setback with plantings and those types of things, and that may be appropriate in some areas, but there's other areas such as downtown and areas that it just may not work. So I've reached out to a few people, and I just wanted to raise it to the Planning Commission's attention that maybe at some point that may come back to us. I don't think we have the bandwidth right now to handle all of that, but it's an important enough, for me, I think it's an important enough conversation that it needs to have a deeper dive on it. So I just wanted to put that out there for the commission.
Okay, well, we'll honestly, I'd expected that would come back to the Planning Commission. I couldn't imagine the council would go directly with a change to the code, but I guess I'm wrong.
Well, it will come back, but with specific direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what Commissioner Borowski is alluding to or referring to is that the motion made by council was very specific about how to solve the problem. And so that's what it's a very, very specific motion, very direct. And so that's what we're moving forward with. And they also directed that we bring them back what we heard from public comment. And so we had several focus groups, and we're bringing them back on Wednesday, what we've heard from those folks. And I think, we have heard similar things to what you expressed, Commissioner Borowski. And I think and Gabe, you can feel free to jump in to add to more since you're closer to this. But I think, the motion also says make sure that there are exceptions. And so if we're thinking about, so that sizzle pie type of building doesn't need to be set back 5 feet with landscaping. And so that there will be exceptions. I don't know exactly what those are, but they definitely are thinking of it, trying to not make it such a one size fits all approach. Gabe, do you have any more to add to that?
Sure, just as a little preview, and I think commissioners are, of course, welcome to watch the webcast, but we presented what we think are some fairly direct and surgical code amendments such that we can actually meet the fairly prescriptive intent of the motion, right? It was a fairly direct charge to staff to set the default such that commercial zones would have a setback and a minimum requirement for landscaping. So we've prepared some of that preliminary code language with the notion that we also need to follow the direction from council to move ahead quickly within the next 6 months, right? And so in terms of a code amendment, and on the heels of a clear and objective process like this, I think we recognize with our rather full plate and our work plan that this needs to stay relatively contained. And to that end, we expect to come back to the commission for an initial public hearing on a set of amendments in the spring. So just a little bit of a preview in terms of the timing on that.
Okay, well, that's all very good, and sounds like the meeting could be an entertaining watch. If we're run out of things on Netflix or anything else, be sure and tune into the City Council. Anything else? Or are we done here? I think I'm sensing that we're done on that reference. So until tomorrow, enjoy your evenings, and we'll see you then.